Hello, my friends, and welcome back to NPA Discovery, where we uncover the untold truths behind the brightest stars and the darkest shadows of fame. If you're new here, I'm your name, and I want to thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with friends who love true stories of music history, and of course, subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive. Now, let me ask you something: is fame a blessing, or a slow-motion tragedy waiting to happen? Some people think it's the ultimate dream: applause, money, adoration. But David Cassidy's life asks us to think twice. He was the golden boy of the 1970s, a name screamed by millions of teenage fans around the world. Yet behind the flashing lights and sold-out arenas was a young man quietly unraveling. In today's video, we're going to explore the dizzying rise of David Cassidy, the cultural hurricane known as Cassidy Mania, and the heartbreaking way his story ended. And as we go, I'll share my own thoughts on why his story still matters today, not just as entertainment history, but as a cautionary tale about chasing approval while losing yourself. The roots of a star. David Bruce Cassidy was born in April 1950 into what many would call a showbiz royal family. His father, Jack Cassidy, was an award-winning actor and singer with Broadway prestige. His mother, Evelyn Ward, was a talented actress in her own right. On paper, little David was born into the perfect life for a future star. But here's the first twist: star power in the family doesn't guarantee love in the home. Jack and Evelyn's lives revolved around the stage, the set, and the next big break. That meant long absences, a revolving door of travel, and very little time spent raising their only child. David was often left in the care of his grandparents, a far cry from the glamorous life people imagined. This lack of parental presence planted the first seed in a lifelong pattern. David would spend decades chasing approval, applause, and attention, perhaps because he didn't get enough of it when it mattered most, in childhood. The shock no child should get. David's relationship with his parents was so distant that he didn't even know they had divorced, until 2 years after the fact. Imagine being a young boy, and learning from neighborhood kids, not your own family, that your parents are no longer together. That kind of emotional disconnection leaves a mark. When Jack remarried, David suddenly had a new stepmother, actress Shirley Jones. Yes, that Shirley Jones, who would later become his co-star in The Partridge Family. But in those early years, she was simply the new maternal figure in his life. A career is born. Jack, perhaps seeing potential in his son, introduced him to talent manager Ruth Aarons. Now, Aarons wasn't just a manager, she was the kind of forceful stage mother figure who knows how to turn raw talent into bankable gold. She saw in David a spark, a charisma that couldn't be taught. His stage debut was in a short-lived Broadway musical called The Fig Leaves Are Falling. The show was a flop, closing after just a handful of performances, but David stood out. A casting director in the audience noticed his natural screen presence and offered him a screen test. That moment was the ignition spark of a career that would soon go nuclear. David moved to Los Angeles, landing guest spots on popular shows like Ironside. And then, in 1970, came the role that would change everything: Keith Partridge, the fictional eldest son in The Partridge Family. The series was light, fun, and musical, but no one expected the tsunami of fame it would unleash. Working alongside Shirley Jones, David had a steady presence on screen, but behind the scenes, it was clear who the real magnet for viewers was. It wasn't long before record executives realized that Cassidy's voice, paired with his boyish charm, could sell millions of albums. Now, here's where it gets almost surreal. Within a year, David Cassidy went from being a TV actor to the biggest teen idol in the world, eclipsing even the Beatles and Elvis Presley in fan club numbers. His concerts weren't just performances, they were seismic events. Teenage girls screamed until they fainted. Police had to hold back crowds. And in one case, we'll get into this later, that hysteria would turn deadly. What's striking here is how unprepared Cassidy was for this scale of obsession. He had grown up around fame, he'd seen fans swarm his father, but nothing could have prepared him for the machine of global teen idoldom. And here's my opinion: it's not just the screaming fans that destroy a person's sense of self, it's the industry that keeps pushing, squeezing, and monetizing until there's nothing left but exhaustion. An image he couldn't escape. Cassidy tried to break the wholesome teen idol image early on. In 1972, he appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone, naked, strategically posed, hoping to shock his way into being taken more seriously. Instead, it only fueled the obsession. His fame went into overdrive. Here's the irony: David was trapped in the very image that made him famous. If he leaned into it, he felt fake. If he pushed against it, the world just pulled harder. That's the kind of no-win situation that can eat away at someone's mental health, and David was no exception. When fame turns deadly. By the early 1970s, David Cassidy was more than just famous, he was a phenomenon. To put it in perspective, his fan club wasn't just bigger than Elvis Presley's, it was bigger than Elvis and the Beatles combined. That's not just celebrity, that's a social event, a tidal wave of human obsession. A career is born. Jack, perhaps seeing potential in his son, introduced him to talent manager Ruth Aarons. Now, Aarons wasn't just a manager, she was the kind of forceful stage mother figure who knows how to turn raw talent into bankable gold. She saw in David a spark, a charisma that couldn't be taught. His stage debut was in a short-lived Broadway musical called The Fig Leaves Are Falling. The show was a flop, closing after just a handful of performances, but David stood out. A casting director in the audience noticed his natural screen presence and offered him a screen test. That moment was the ignition spark of a career that would soon go nuclear. David moved to Los Angeles, landing guest spots on popular shows like Ironside. And then, in 1970, came the role that would change everything: Keith Partridge, the fictional eldest son in the Partridge Family. The series was light, fun, and musical, but no one expected the tsunami of fame it would unleash. Working alongside Shirley Jones, David had a steady presence on screen, but behind the scenes, it was clear who the real magnet for viewers was. It wasn't long before record executives realized that Cassidy's voice, paired with his boyish charm, could sell millions of albums. Now, here's where it gets almost surreal. Within a year, David Cassidy went from being a TV actor to the biggest teen idol in the world, eclipsing even the Beatles and Elvis Presley in fan club numbers. His concerts weren't just performances, they were seismic events. Teenage girls screamed until they fainted. Police had to hold back crowds. And in one case, we'll get into this later, that hysteria would turn deadly. What's striking here is how unprepared Cassidy was for this scale of obsession. He had grown up around fame, he'd seen fans swarm his father, but nothing could have prepared him for the machine of global teen idoldom. And here's my opinion: it's not just the screaming fans that destroy a person's sense of self, it's the industry that keeps pushing, squeezing, and monetizing until there's nothing left but exhaustion. An image he couldn't escape. Cassidy tried to break the wholesome teen idol image early on. In 1972, he appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone, naked, strategically posed, hoping to shock his way into being taken more seriously. Instead, it only fueled the obsession. His fame went into overdrive. Here's the irony: David was trapped in the very image that made him famous. If he leaned into it, he felt fake. If he pushed against it, the world just pulled harder. That's the kind of no-win situation that can eat away at someone's mental health, and David was no exception. When fame turns deadly. By the early 1970s, David Cassidy was more than just famous, he was a phenomenon. To put it in perspective, his fan club wasn't just bigger than Elvis Presley's, it was bigger than Elvis and the Beatles combined. That's not just celebrity, that's a social event, a tidal wave of human obsession. For a brief time, it looked like he might escape the cycle. He married actress Kay Lenz in 1977, hoping for something resembling a normal life. But here's the problem with marrying a teen idol: you don't just marry the man, you marry his fan base. Lenz later recalled getting hate mail from women who claimed they had 3 of David's children, or who simply wanted her gone. Imagine trying to have breakfast with your spouse while someone's sending you a letter saying they're more entitled to him than you are. That marriage, unsurprisingly, didn't last. A comeback, and a cost. By 1980, Cassidy was broke. Years of high living, bad management decisions, and stepping away from the spotlight had drained his fortune. So he went back on the road. The good news? This time, no crowds were crushed. The bad news? The magic of his peak years was gone, and so was the protective shield of youth. Critics were harsher, the industry had moved on, and the audiences were smaller. It's worth pausing here to note something: fame is a terrible thing to lose once you've had it. Many former stars describe it like going from constant sunlight to permanent winter. Some adapt. Others, like Cassidy, struggle, especially if their self-worth is tied to applause. The shadow of addiction. David's life in the 1980s and 1990s was a mix of small comebacks and personal battles. Alcohol became his coping mechanism, the place he went when the stage lights went out. He had moments of success, chart hits in the early 1990s, stage performances, TV roles. But the shadow of his past, and the pressure of living up to a legend that was built when he was barely out of his teens, never truly left him. I think this is where his story becomes the most relatable, because you don't have to be a pop star to understand what it feels like to be haunted by a younger version of yourself, the one who had it all, and to feel like you can't live up to it anymore. The final years and the truth he couldn't hide. By the 2000s, David Cassidy was no longer at the top of the charts, but he remained a beloved figure for the millions who had grown up with the Partridge Family. Nostalgia tours, talk show appearances, and fan conventions kept his name alive. But behind the public smiles, his personal life was coming apart. Cracks in the image. In 2008, David filed for divorce from his third wife, songwriter Sue Schifrin, after more than 2 decades of marriage. The couple had a son, Beau, and David often spoke proudly of him. But even fatherhood couldn't insulate him from the patterns that had haunted him since his youth: the constant search for validation, the need to escape from emotional pain. Alcohol had been a shadow in his life for decades, but by the 2010s, it became impossible to hide. The public unraveling. David faced multiple arrests for DUI, in 2010, 2013, and 2014. Each time, fans expressed concern, but also confusion. How could someone so charismatic, so beloved, keep making the same destructive choices? The truth is that addiction isn't rational. It doesn't respond to logic or public shame. And for someone who'd lived most of his life under the gaze of millions, the pressure to appear fine was exhausting. In 2017, David shocked the public by announcing he had been diagnosed with dementia, a condition that had affected his mother and grandfather. It seemed like a heartbreaking but sympathetic explanation for his forgetfulness, missed lyrics, and sometimes erratic performances. The revelation. But then came the twist. Shortly before his death later that year, David admitted in a recorded interview that he didn't actually have dementia, at least, not the type the public believed. His memory problems, he revealed, were the result of years of alcohol abuse. "I did it to myself," he said. "To cover up the sadness and emptiness." That's an admission most celebrities never make. It stripped away the protective narrative and exposed something raw. He wasn't a victim of fate alone, he had been his own worst enemy. The final days. In November 2017, David was hospitalized for liver and kidney failure. Fans hoped for a miracle. But those closest to him knew the damage was too great. In his final hours, surrounded by family, he reportedly spoke words that still echo in interviews and fan forums today: "So much wasted time." For a man who had once seemed to have the world at his feet, that's a devastating epitaph. Not wasted in the sense of career, his achievements were massive, but wasted in the sense of living in constant fear, chasing applause instead of peace, and letting addiction steal years he could never get back. The legacy and the lesson. David Cassidy's story is more than just the rise and fall of a teen idol. It's a mirror for anyone who has ever tried to live up to an image, whether that's in entertainment, on social media, or in real life. His highs were dizzyingly high: record-breaking fame, adoring fans, cultural impact. His lows were brutally human: failed relationships, financial struggles, addiction, and regret. What strikes me most is that his final message wasn't about fame at all. It wasn't, "I wish I'd made more records," or "I wish I'd stayed at number one." It was about time, the most precious currency any of us have. David's life reminds us, applause fades, headlines disappear, and careers end. But the way we spend our days, the way we invest our time in people, in health, in purpose, is the only part that really lasts. The bigger picture, when fame becomes a trap. David Cassidy's rise and fall didn't happen in a vacuum. To understand it fully, we have to look at the cultural machine that built him up, and tore him down. The blueprint of a teen idol. In the early 1970s, television networks and record labels had a formula. You take a wholesome-looking young man, give him catchy songs, a family-friendly TV show, and saturate the media with his face. With the Partridge Family, the formula worked to perfection. But the machine didn't just create a performer, it created a brand. David Cassidy wasn't just a singer, he was a lunchbox, a poster, a board game, a magazine cover. The issue? When your image is your product, the real person underneath often gets lost. The economics of obsession. Merchandising was a huge part of Cassidy's fame, and his financial downfall. In today's money, the Cassidy brand generated hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet David saw only a tiny fraction of that income. The contracts he signed as a young actor and singer heavily favored the studio and the label. This is a pattern we've seen repeatedly, from the Monkees in the 60s to boy bands like NSYNC in the 90s. The bitter truth? Teen idols are rarely in control of their own careers at the height of their fame. They're often treated as replaceable parts in a profitable system. The psychology of Cassidy Mania. It's tempting to dismiss the screaming fans as just part of the show. But crowd hysteria is a real psychological phenomenon. When thousands of people focus their emotions on a single figure, the group can behave in ways that individuals never would. This is why crowds surged at Cassidy concerts, why girls fainted at the sight of him, and why security teams often underestimated the danger. In Cassidy's case, the hysteria turned deadly, and his fame was never the same afterward. The modern twist. If David Cassidy had risen to fame today, social media would have amplified everything, the adoration, the criticism, and the pressure. Instead of monthly teen magazines, there would be millions of TikTok edits, Twitter threads, and Instagram fan accounts. The speed at which fame can rise, and collapse, has only increased. The lesson? The human cost is just as real, if not greater. Why Cassidy's story still matters. David Cassidy's life is a cautionary tale, not because he failed, but because he succeeded too well. The fame machine he entered wasn't built to protect him, it was built to profit from him, for as long as he could sell records and tickets. And yet, his story isn't purely tragic. His music still makes people smile. His TV show still brings comfort to fans who grew up with it. And his final words, "So much wasted time," remain one of the most powerful warnings a celebrity has ever left behind. The takeaway: time is the only thing you can't buy back. We followed David Cassidy from his dizzying rise in the early 70s, through the chaos of Cassidy Mania, into the darker corners of his personal struggles, and finally to his final days. But here's the truth, this isn't just the story of a celebrity. It's the story of anyone who's ever chased approval at the expense of their own well-being. The real cost of chasing the spotlight. David's career gave him almost everything people think they want: fame, money, beauty, and adoration. But when the lights went out and the crowds went home, he was left with something far less glamorous: emptiness. It's not that success is bad. It's that when success becomes your identity, you lose the parts of yourself that fame can't feed: connection, authenticity, peace of mind. So much wasted time, what did he mean? When David spoke those words to his family in his last hours, it wasn't about regret over missed career moves. It was about time spent worrying, performing, and numbing pain instead of truly living. It was about the years he lost to addiction, the moments with loved ones he didn't fully show up for. The way he spent so long trying to be David Cassidy the icon, instead of David Cassidy the man. We live in a culture that rewards constant performance, whether it's posting the perfect Instagram photo, building a YouTube following, or keeping up an image at work. David's story reminds us, there's no applause loud enough to fill a life that's empty when you're alone. If we don't make time for health, for relationships, for purpose, we may end up with the same haunting realization he had, that we've been busy, but not truly living. What you can learn from his life. 1. Guard your time like it's gold. Because it is. You can always make more money, but you can't make more time. 2. Don't build your whole self-worth on public approval. The crowd will cheer today and forget tomorrow. 3. Face your pain before it becomes your prison. David numbed his with alcohol, others do it with work, distractions, or toxic relationships. 4. Define success on your own terms. Not the world's terms, not your industry's terms, yours. David Cassidy left the world with a bittersweet legacy. His music still plays. His smile still lights up old interviews. And for millions, he'll always be the boy in the colorful bus, singing about love and family. But maybe his greatest gift wasn't a song at all, it was a sentence, so much wasted time. If you hear those words and feel a chill, good. Let them be a reminder. Because the clock is ticking for all of us, and the most radical thing you can do with your life is to make sure that, when the final curtain falls, you can say with confidence, I spent my time well.